Hello and welcome to our podcast. I'm Danny, and today Great.com talks with Margot Long, the President and CEO of Youth Empowerment and Supportive Service, or YESS. If you haven't heard of it yet, its mission is to walk beside traumatized youth on their journeys towards healing and appropriate community integration. Before we begin, remember, if you're new here to this podcast, press subscribe on YouTube or on your podcast app. Now, hi, Margot, and
Hi,
welcome.
Danielle. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. I'm eager to discuss these issues with you. But let's begin, as I usually do, with the story of Yes. How and when did it all begin?
You bet. So we're quite old. We've been around for 40 years, uh, 41 now. We were established in 1981. And so we're based out of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And in Edmonton in 1981 and leading up to that, there was a gap between supports for young people, youth, that ended, the government support for youth ended at 16. And the adult support started at 18. And so originally, and support could mean housing, shelter, finance, employment support, whatever that looked like for a young person who was in distress, in crisis, and needed a hand up. And so at that point, there was that distinct gap, and there were quite a few youth who were living rough or languishing because they weren't getting that support between the 2 years. And so some community members worked with the city, located a building and started the Youth Emergency Shelter Society in 1981. So we started off as an overnight shelter for youth 16 to 18. And over those years, we've evolved into an organization. We have about 75 staff. We have 2 supportive housing programs right now, as well as a new program that has combined our shelter and our resource hub. So in the past, we ran an overnight shelter, which is a typical model in Canada for an overnight shelter, whether it's youth or adults, is let them in at night. You know, they sort of line up at 8 or 9 o'clock. You process them. They sleep on mats or bunks. You feed them. They get access to showers and laundry, and then they're out again in the morning. And then they have to figure out what to do for the day, walk around, especially that's very tricky during COVID or when it's cold outside. And so when we had the overnight shelter, we created a drop-in center in about 2012, where young people could then go during the day to get resources and support and hang out during the day. But what we noticed is that there was still a big gap in that 24/7 lack of 24/7 support and 24/7 intake for beds. So often we serve young people who are experiencing crisis, and they come to us from backgrounds of, they might come from the foster system. So they may be orphans, they may be members of Indigenous nations, First Nations, Inuit, Métis, who have been part of the generational trauma in our country, where their parents were part of the 60s scoop, and they've been in the foster care system and traumatized from that. We see a lot of young people who've been kicked out of their home for being queer or trans. We see young people who are victims of domestic violence, sexual abuse at home or within the community, and young people who are mentally ill or dealing with concurrent issues and not getting support within the system. And so they end up on the street because they don't, they're either kicked out of home because of either because of the situation and inability for family to handle the mental illness. There may be mental illness in the home. There's so much complexity, but it's really family or community breakdown, why young people come to us. We serve 15 to 21-year-olds with housing or shelter beds, and we serve 15 to 25-year-olds in resource support, medical support. We have a medical clinic. And those restrictions are based on the government's licensing out of foster care with children's services. We'd like to serve up to 25 at least, because of The brain isn't developed for young people, at least until age 25. That's when your neurons in the frontal cortex are finally built to be able to have good executive functioning and reasoning. And so often we're making 18 as an adult in system terms, whether you can, drive or vote or drink. We're assigning 18 as an adulthood chronologically, but often young people haven't built the frontal cortex enough to make really good complex decisions. And that process is slowed or halted or modified when they're in crisis. So if their cortisol levels are super high, they're in fight or flight and they're just trying to survive, they're not building that frontal cortex neurons. And so we've got varying degrees of abilities to understand, make decisions. They still have a lot of life skills potentially to learn. And so we've really noticed that we need to be there 24/7 for them, and we need that intake. Young people have crisis at 3 a.m. They don't have crisis at 3 p.m. on a Monday, when they can come in for office hours. And often a lot of our services in the city are for those people who can make an appointment, who have ID, who have the wherewithal and the mental health to even walk in somewhere and ask for help. There are lots of people that don't, and especially young people that don't have that. So we've moved to a 24/7 intake model, and we've actually pushed our drop-in center and our shelter together and changed the way we're doing things so that we're in community, we're smaller, and we're able to provide that wraparound support for young people 24/7, at least on the intake. And then the other thing that we're doing is really focusing not on the symptom of homelessness or on the symptom of mental health, any of these pieces that are symptoms of family breakdown and trauma and unhealed or untreated trauma. We're focusing on the holistic well-being of youth. We need to look at these young people as whole humans and what they need individually in their stories to be able to build the life skills and the well-being skills to make their own healthy futures. And we have to stop just providing them a bed and a job and thinking that they're going to be great and able to just take off from there. And often what happens is we punish them, the system punishes them. So we now run a center that's in the community with both drop-in and 24/7 intake. And we're lobbying to create more of those across the city and the province with our partners in a collaboration so that we have small community supports and not big warehouses for young people with, very little staff and very little programming or support.
Wow. What a journey, I gotta say. And thank you for sharing that explanation about how we develop and how we are not fully developed. Our brains are not fully developed until we are 25. And I think it's so true. But that shifts the perspective, right? And I kept thinking about that gap that you mentioned about that happened before between this age of 16 and 18, and then how we're still not fully comprehending how youth need our assistance, our help. So it's really powerful to hear that from you and to have this so we can share with our listeners. And Margot, you actually mentioned a few of the challenges that you are facing now as a society, I would say, in Edmonton right now. But could you tell us more about the need that you're seeing? Because just so we understand how complicated the situation is and what are the most pressing challenges, most pressing issues that you are dealing with right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're seeing more youth in crisis than we've ever seen before. I'm seeing probably 3 times the number of youth coming in with complex mental health issues in the middle of the night. Youth that we wouldn't have seen before because they have family involvement, but they're not able to access the mental health services and trauma-specific mental health services that they need. I think COVID had a really negative effect on our community and on on the young people especially. Social isolation has really helped increase the difficulty for people don't know how to have relationships. They don't know how to connect with each other, and healing trauma, you heal that through connection and relationship. You know, from what, I'm not an expert, but from what I've learned from the staff around me and the experts who do advise us, you heal trauma through relationship. You're traumatized in relationship, and it's actually within that a new relationship that's trusted that you begin to heal. And that first relationship is with yourself. And so, you know, I'm seeing young people who don't have the support of the community or family or the government. And so there's a lot of despair and there's a lot of anger and frustration. So we're seeing youth self-medicate with substances because they don't have access to the mental health support and medical support that they need, because they feel alienated from the community or from their family or both. And because the way the community is responding and the way our systems are responding is to penalize that even more, it's creating more crisis. And so, you know, we work really hard at, one, helping a young person start with that most important relationship, which is with themselves. The thing that happens to young people when something traumatic, and that's something that they can't control, they can't get out of, it's a surprise and they have no power over, and is extremely awful. That is life-changing for a young person. And the young person, and we talked about this neuron that they're building later in their life, they don't have the ability to know it's not their fault. So when bad things happen to young children and to young adults, they make it their fault. And so there's a high shame component to young people that we see, and they don't have a relationship with themselves. And that's the first thing to overcome before they can start working on getting a job or doing some of these things, because they continue to fail if they don't see themselves as successful or deserving or really, you know, allowed to be within the community. And then the second piece is around relationships with trusted others. And so our role becomes mentor and model of healthy relationships, which is a really difficult thing to do when the system doesn't pay for staffing. It's really interesting as not-for-profits. You know, we talk about how not-for-profits are expected and charities are expected to work so leanly compared to the business organizations. And we know in business, I'm a business strategist. I came from the business world. The more you input, the more you get out, especially if you're strategic. But it's very difficult for organizations and not-for-profits to be strategic and to really invest where they need to, because there is a different set of rules for charities and not-for-profits. They are not allowed to invest. We're not allowed to pay for staff the way that the market does. And yet it's expected that we're going to get the same results, and then always surprised when we don't. And the most important work in social services is the work that the humans do. So, you know, some of the challenges we face here is that our funding system is often piecemeal. You know, the government may say, we're going to put 1 million towards youth homelessness, and we're going to divide it up between 27 agencies. And that's going to solve it. And then often, you know, those agencies are asked to compete when we're not selling commodities and we're not in a capitalist sort of situation in social services. We're asked to compete against each other, say why we're better or different, and then how we're going to collaborate with our partners once we beat them out for money. And then we're asked how we're going to sustain this $200,000 program that we're running that we're only getting 10 grand for. So that perpetuative cycle is so tricky and really so non-strategic. You know, you're paying for something with 7 different gift cards for a year and then hoping and promising that you're going to figure it out next year. And that really is so detrimental to the relationships and the work that's being done. You know, programming is staff. It's not scissors and tape. It is highly expert youth workers who are writing, you know, suicide reports and helping with suicide plans. They're helping families reunify. They may be giving, talking about a girlfriend or a breakup. And then they may turn around and have to administer naloxone or deal with a stabbing in the same night. And yet they're being, counted as frontline minimal workers. And so some of this is really about, can we be more strategic? Can we be more collaborative? And can we really focus and build awareness on the input into these organizations for staffing is the absolute most important thing that we could be doing to take care of our communities. And it's everyone in the community. We see youth from rich neighborhoods, from tech neighborhoods, from immigrant neighborhoods, from First Nations, everywhere. We see higher representations of youth in marginalized and discriminated populations, but we see it everywhere. That is a common piece, and that these young people actually need staff to build relationships and walk beside them through this time that's so important.
I am so glad that you brought all of those things up, because the only thing that I would say is different is that sometimes I feel that the burden of performance on people working on NGOs or non-for-profit is heavier. Kind of, we as a society expect more of you dealing with such great challenges to, do something that is kind of like saint-like. You just go and do and change, and we don't really expect you to need a payment sometimes. And I include myself in this, because not that I expect, but because I don't stop to think enough about this structure and what it takes to keep things going. So
yeah,
I'm really happy that you brought that, and also that you brought this aspect of relationships, because that's in the core of your approach, right? As an organization. And I think for all that you said, and from the mission statement that you guys have, like walking beside
traumatized youth on their journey towards healing in the community. Yeah,
it is something so powerful. And I'm interested to knowing more about how this play along with the services that you have. Could you talk us through it a little bit more so we understand your structure and how these things get together?
Yeah, I can do my best. And I think so. It just going back to the not-for-profit discussion and the expectance that charities are more puritanical, that businesses can run their business however they want, but that not-for-profits and charities have to limit their administrative fees is something we have to change completely. It's important too, I think, to know that a lot of what we're told, the onus isn't on the organization to either come up with, here's what we're doing, or to fix things. And we took that upon ourselves. So in Edmonton, 7 years ago, we created the Youth Agency Collaboration because there was no strategy for young people, because we were often not working together, because we were expected to compete, and because young people were asking us. That was the biggest message, is that young people were saying, can you please share our stories? Can you work together? We can see you fighting. We have to tell our story each time we go to a different agency. We even have vocabulary like our kids, when often a young person is a client of maybe 5 agencies at any given time, depending on what's needed. And we were so exhausted in this cycle of trying to come up with something. It's really hard to focus your organization. In business, you have a differentiated value. What is it that you do well that the market needs? It's different. But in a continuum of care, how do you know what to fit in if you're not all working on the strategy together? And that just wasn't happening. So 7 years later, we have 27 agencies working together in Edmonton, and we built a strategy for ourselves. And the first pinnacle is we need shared outcomes. We need to agree on actually working towards the same thing. And that same thing shouldn't be dictated by funders necessarily. It should be dictated by the people. It's good continuous improvement to have the youth and the youth workers really inform this process. What should we be measuring, and what are we trying to achieve? And none of us were looking at how is the kid coming in and how are they when they leave? Are we making any progress? We're often measured on how many kids slept there, how many beds do you have, how open are you, how many meals did you serve, did you deliver this content? But not how are they, which is why we're in this cycle. And so we've created a holistic assessment and a list of holistic outcomes for youth that are based on the Indigenous framework of physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, cultural, with multidisciplinary people coming in to create that assessment across the collaboration. And the intent would be that every single agency would use the same intake and assessment to track young people when they come through. We've also acknowledged that we need that 24/7 intake in community and to not have a centralized shelter downtown. So that first part of our strategy is to have these centers across the city and then to use a platform, a community information exchange, to share client data based on their consent and with their participation on what their plan is, so that we can track their progress when they go into another community, when they go and live at home. We can, and that does, it's ridiculous to say, but we don't do that now. Every agency has something different, every funder. And so just that ability to come together has made a huge difference. The barriers that we're seeing right now is that we've made this change, we're working, we actually have this strategy, we have the assessment, we're trying to raise money for a platform to do that. But to then expect the system on the other side to change is going to be a lot of work and a lot of awareness, so that we can have a block funding strategy, different funding for the collaborative that really aligns this whole continuum of care for young people, so that when they walk in crisis, we can stabilize them, we can triage what they need, we can say, do you have a safe place with family right now? Great. Are you able to go back and we can support you with a medical or a mental health clinic? You don't have a safe play and you're in, great. Well, we can stabilize you tonight. Are you not doing well because you're on a substance and need support? We can help you there. And then over time, if we're finding it more and more that you don't have support, we'll do a full assessment. We'll work with the whole 27 agencies to find you appropriate housing based on how much regulation you need, how far you are along in your emotional development, how many life skills you need to learn. We can really understand and create programming or put them in places where that work is being done in the communities that they feel safest.
I'm really amazed by this possibility, and I think it is a game changer. Honestly, it is something that not just for possibility to get results like in numbers or have this evaluation, but to make this person that is going through this spiral of places, I would say, because it's not like a linear thing. Oh, we move from house 1 to house 2 and that's progress. No, it's like we're just like a pinball ball going and trying to figure my way out. So maybe that person can feel more at home, more looked after, I would say. So it really is really something, Margot. I'm interested in keep watching this and see how it develop. I think would be really a game changer. That's the word that comes to me right now. That's
We're hoping
amazing.
so. When we look at our national, we have a national observatory on homelessness, a research at a U of T or Trent University, and then we have a coalition. And when in 2017, the observatory did research interviewing adults experiencing homelessness across Canada. 50% of them identified that they were homeless before the age of 25. So those individuals are the ones that fall through all of the cracks. And I would argue are of those, overrepresented populations within our country who are not getting help and support. But if we could stop the cycle of trauma and work with them before 25, we could stop that entrenchment into a life of social services and so much expense for the country, which seems to be what they're worried about, we really could make a difference and be much more strategic. But it is about investing in, and because for YESS, for example, we're only 20% government funded with contracts, even though we serve youth across the city and the province. We're only funded for those that have children's services files. We're not the community youth. And it's interesting that those demographics have changed. So in over 7 years, it's been about 30% of the youth have been in the foster system or under children's services care, and 70% weren't. It's now about 50-50. And what we're seeing is a major increase in 15-year-olds, as well as a gap between that 21 and 25 age, where they're still not, they're getting money, but they're not getting that relationship support. So it's quite interesting. You can see who's coming out because that's who's not being supported. But we could be very strategic and really eliminate this if we worked earlier at the young side. And we're trying to advocate for youth agencies to be at the decision-making tables. They're not right now in our country. So can they be making those policies? Can we lower the ages or extend the age for youth, and look at some of the policies around shelters and other, staffing funding, so that we can address this much earlier on? That's true prevention, complete prevention.
And I think that's the insight, right? It's about prevention. It's not about fixing something that's happening afterwards. It's about preventing that it even happens. So that's the thing. And since you mentioned funding, let's talk about this. What are the best ways for our listeners and people watching on YouTube? What are the best ways for people to get involved with your cause, Margot? We'll have to keep going.
The best way for us is donation. We do have some volunteering, and you can go to our website, yes.org, and sign up for volunteering or for donating. It's tough with young people who are in crisis because they are very fragile, and we have to be, and it requires an expertise to work with young people. So a lot of the volunteering is sort of at events and other pieces and not with the young people. But funding allows us to do the incredible work that the youth workers are doing. And trust funding, so that it's not designated to a specific area, is the most helpful. Donating to general operations is the most helpful thing you could do for an organization, to show, do some research, meet with executive, try to know as much as you can about an organization and trust that they're doing good work, but don't worry about the administrative fee, and really invest in the operational dollars so that they can hire the staff that they need to do the work that they're doing. It's really tough here right now. During COVID, we were actually able to, because we were frontline, able to access a lot of grants, and that kept us quite solid during that time. But there's a lot of donor fatigue. The economy is really struggling. And we've noticed donations have gone down because of that. Individual amounts and inflation, and all of those pieces are creating a lot of stress points for our citizens. So we're seeing more youth in the system, but we're not seeing more funding into the social services. And so definitely monetary support is the best way.
Thank you so much, Margot, for joining us today. I learned a whole lot. Honestly, it was really great.
I loved talking with you, Danielle. Thank you so much for what you do. This is an incredible idea, and we're so grateful to be on and get to share our story a little bit.
It was a pleasure, truly. And for everybody listening or watching, thank you so much for staying with us for one more episode. And remember, if you enjoyed it, press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app, because that shows the algorithms that this is an important conversation, and we can spread the word about the importance of, YESS, youth empowerment and support services. Go check their page. We're going to have it on the link on the description of this episode. And I see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.